What would you say about the Teutonic Knights in terms of their position within the Christian world at that time? They have a pretty bad reputation now. I mean, I know Christian said that pretty much every atrocity imaginable has been attributed to them. But do you think that their ideology and the way they approached governing and converting these people, was it in line with the way that Latin Christendom in general was thinking, or were they a little bit more hardcore, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, the conditions were such that they were probably a little more hardcore, I think, than your average Templar or Hospitaller or any of the other orders that we associate with the Holy Land, although these are all sort of continental orders. They all had houses and priories from the Holy Land to throughout Europe, really, throughout what is now Europe, as opposed to other orders which were quite local, say just on the Iberian frontier, something like that. What is distinctive about them is that they did constitute the government, right? This Ordensstaat, this order state, Teutonic order state, which, if you look at a map of the era, is quite extensive. Is for a long time, until it's actually stopped by force of arms. It continues to grow. It's a very successful operation, if you like. As you know, of course, the members of the order were never crusaders in the strict sense of that term. It was a different kind of animal, but they were fighting in the Crusades, which I think is the important point. So they had a presence in the Holy Land, for example, and they drew recruits and resources from across Latin Christendom. But of course, they were focused primarily in the north, in the Baltic and German parts of Latin Christendom. The standards of brutality and propriety were a little different. I know you know this back then.
Oh yeah.
I think the great success of the order and indeed of the Baltic, the Northern Crusades, was they really did expand Christendom. And even if in the short run, in the Wendish period, they didn't do much by way of conversion, well, that was always going to be a long-term social phenomenon. Establishing the politics, right, establishing a system of government in which it was a good thing to be a Christian, is obviously going to incline rational people maybe over a generation to decide to become members of the church. It's worth pointing out too, by the way, that at least one interpretation of the Crusades to the Holy Land has, let me back up, several, maybe it's the consensus view now, is that in the Holy Land, people weren't, when the initial Arab Muslim conquest took place, people weren't flocking to convert. In fact, they weren't encouraged to convert for a variety of reasons initially. But over time, when you had an Islamic state in place, a government in place, over generations, most people rationally made the choice that if I want to get on in life, I've got to be a Muslim. And so made that decision. So I wouldn't want to push the parallel too far, but I think it's interesting. I think there's a common, it's a common dynamic, although operating maybe in reverse, at one end of Latin Christendom and the other.
The holy lands of the Middle East have run with blood. Here, the scars of battle fought between three of the great religions of the world are etched into the earth. But the deepest wound was made by a war between Christian and Muslim, begun at the close of the 11th century and fought for 200 years. At stake, a tiny strip of land just a few hundred miles long, but with the greatest prize: Jerusalem. Now this holy war has passed into legend. But there were those who saw it with their own eyes. Great chroniclers from two different worlds, Christian and Muslim, who wrote of great deeds, great battles, great warriors, of men who would lay down their lives for their God. This was the collision of two great faiths, the clash between the crescent and the cross. This was the Crusades. In 1096, to great fanfare, more than 60,000 Christian warriors set off from Europe on the First Crusade. Their goal was Jerusalem. For more than 400 years, the Holy City had been in Muslim control. The Crusaders vowed to reclaim it in the name of Christ.
For Christians, Jerusalem is so important because Jesus died here on the cross and he rose from death. So the most important point of the history of salvation took place there. So therefore, Jerusalem for the Christians is the center of the world.
This Christian army had struggled its way 3,000 miles across the forbidding landscape of the Middle East in a series of epic encounters with the forces of Islam. After 3 years, this, the First Crusade, reached the walls of Jerusalem. Once inside, no one was spared. An estimated 30,000 citizens were slaughtered by the Crusaders. Muslims, Jews, even fellow Christians. But as the Crusaders reveled in victory, slowly, steadily, the Muslims prepared to strike back. Eventually, the wrath of Islam would be unleashed on the fledgling Crusader kingdom, under one leader, Saladin, and one battle cry, Jihad.
When Jerusalem was taken during the First Crusade, the killings were horrible. Jews who'd gathered in the temple were burnt. Promises made to Muslims that Muslim women and children would be allowed out free were violated with impunity.
To Muslim eyes, two of their holiest shrines were now defiled. The Crusaders stabled their horses in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and at the Dome of the Rock, where the Prophet Muhammad is said to have ascended to heaven. They tore off the Islamic symbols to reconsecrate the mosque as a church. In the heart of Jerusalem, its gleaming new crucifix boasted to the Muslims that this was now a Christian city.
They were just stunned and shocked by the violence, the brutality, the killings that were inflicted on them, and what shocked them even more, that this was done in the name of Christianity.
"140 miles to the northeast, in the city of Damascus, thousands of Muslims flocked to the Umayyad Mosque to mourn the loss of Jerusalem.